All right, it's time for our last section in Chapter 9. We're going to be solving equations. It's been a long time since we did that. And we're going to do that by factoring somehow. It's been a long time since we saw equations, but ooh, doesn't that look nice and familiar? So there's our equal sign, back at it. So I've got an equation here. It says that A times B equals 0. So I have a question for you. If we know that you have two numbers, they're both mysteries. We're calling one A, we're calling one B. If you do A times B, you get 0. Do you know what one of these numbers has to equal? Well, if the end answer is 0, that means one of these needs to be 0, right? Maybe it's this one. Maybe it's 7 times 0. Or maybe it's the first one. Maybe it's 0 times negative 89. We don't know, but one of them needs to be 0. So that's actually called the zero product property. So if you know that A times B equals 0, and I just don't have the parentheses here, but this still means multiplication, of course, then either A equals 0 or B equals 0. All right, hopefully you're done writing that down. So what about this then? I still have two things that are multiplied together, right? So either this equals 0 or this equals 0. The difference is I'm not just talking about A, I'm talking about this whole thing. And I'm not just talking about B, I'm talking about this whole thing. But I'm still doing this times this. So that means that one of these needs to equal 0. So maybe x minus 5 equals 0. Or maybe x minus 1 equals 0. So we've got two options here. In fact, we could solve both of these little equations. If x minus 5 equals 0, we could add 5 to both sides. We get x equals 5. Or if x minus 1 equals 0, we could solve this equation, and we get x equals 1. So the weird thing about this section, just like when we were solving those absolute value equations, is all of our equations are going to end up with two answers. So let's take a look at example 1. Go ahead and copy this one down. All right, so what are the two things that I'm multiplying together? Well, I have this and I have this. If this times this equals 0, then that means either this equals 0 or this equals 0. So let's take a second and write them both out. So maybe it's the x minus 2 that equals 0. Or maybe it's the x plus 4 that equals 0. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and solve both of these equations. They're nice little one-step equations. So this one we get x equals 2. This one I would subtract 4 from both sides. So this one I get x equals, what's 0 minus 4? Negative 4. All right, that's it. That's how we do it. So hey, for example 2, copy this one down and try it on your own. Okay, these are the two solutions that we end up with. Did you get the right solutions? Remember, we have two steps here. It's been a long time, but remember, you have to subtract that 9 before you deal with that 3. 0 minus 9 is negative 9. Don't magically drop off that negative. Negative 9 divided by 3 is negative 3. This one, you're adding that 1 to both sides first. You're dividing by 2. And 1 divided by 2 is not 2. 1 divided by 2 is a half. If you have a pizza and you split it in 2, you get half a pizza. So these are our two solutions, negative 3 and 1/2. What if, though, our equation looks like this? So now we don't have two things multiplied together over here. We have this mess, this polynomial. Well, it would be great if it looked like this, if it looked like two things in parentheses. And the good news is we actually know how to turn it into that. That's what we've been doing for the whole last chapter. We know how to factor this quadratic, and it's going to turn it into two binomials multiplied together. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to look at 20. I'm looking for factors of 20 where when I add them up, I get 9. All right, well, I have 5 times 4. We'll do that. So that means this equals x plus 5 times x plus 4. So what I circled can be replaced with this. And now I'm just going to keep my equals 0 there. Now it looks just like the other ones. Now I can go ahead and set this equal to 0 and set this equal to 0. And after I did that, I went ahead and solved my equations. So I get x equals -5 and x equals -4. Those are my two solutions this time. So special note, sometimes you must factor a quadratic in order to solve for the variable. All right, example 3. I would like you to try this one on your own. So copy it down. And when you unpause it, you can see if you got it right. All right, is this what you ended up with? So check your factors. We were looking for factors of -16. Had to be a positive and a negative, and they needed to add up to -6. So our factors were -8 and 2. So that means we rewrote it as x minus 8 and x plus 2. We kept our equals 0 there, hopefully. And then once you got to this point, you could split it into your two equations. So maybe x minus 8 equals 0. Okay, solve for x, you get x equals 8. Maybe x plus 2 equals 0. So solving for x, you're subtracting 2 from both sides. You get x equals -2. For example 4, let's do this one together actually. So copy it down, unpause the video, and we will do it together. All right, so for this one, the thing that's different is I see a number out front. I still need to factor this. Can I pull a 2 out of each of my terms? Unfortunately, no. That would be the easier way to do it, but I can't do that. So what do I have to do with this 2? I got to multiply it to the back. So I'm going to multiply it to that 3. So I get x squared minus 5x minus 6. And I'm going to keep that equals 0 there. All right, so now I still need to factor this. So I'm looking for factors of -6 that add up to give me -5. And it looks like it's going to be -6 times +1. All right, so I'm going to replace this then with my factors, my x minus 6 and my x plus 1. So I get x minus 6, x plus 1, keep that equals 0 there. All right, but what's the extra thing we have to do this time? Well, if we multiplied 2 to the back, we have to undo that later. So I now need to divide back out by 2. So I get, this one's going to become just 3. That's x minus 3. This one, I can't change that. So I'm just going to move this 2 out front. It's going to be 2x plus 1. Keep your equals 0 there. All right. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set each of these equal to 0 separately. So I'm going to have x minus 3 equals 0. And I'm going to have 2x plus 1 equals 0. All right, so x minus 3. Remember, it's really tempting to accidentally just say x equals -3, but you need to add 3 to both sides. So that means x equals +3 here. This one, start by subtracting 1. So 2x equals -1. Divide both sides by 2. I get x equals -1/2. All right, so same thing that we've been doing, it's just all combined together. So you still need to factor, check if you need to multiply to the back. Be very careful when you pick your factors. And then once you have it set up, just set them both equal to 0. And be careful when you solve those equations. It's been a while, so don't speed through it and make little tiny mistakes.